Hello and welcome to my channel. This is my charcoal drawing of the predator. It's a very complex drawing with lots of details, as you can see. Let's have a look. I'm going to be using some of my usual tools. It's mostly going to be woodless charcoal pencils and vine charcoal once I finish the sketch phase. And like I said, this is a very complex, very interesting subject. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the background with a bit of vine charcoal. And I'm going to combine that with charcoal powder from my charcoal pencils. The reason why I do it this way is because it allows me to create some variation in the value, but at the same time to blend more smoothly. Because if I try to do this with charcoal pencils, they would produce a little bit too much texture, and that's kind of what I want to avoid. I want the background to be fairly smooth, and I don't want it to be distracting. Now, vine charcoal allows me to move the charcoal dust very easily, but it's not quite as dark as compressed charcoal from my charcoal pencils. That's why I add a little bit of charcoal powder by sharpening my charcoal pencils, and I make some parts of the background a little bit darker, and I make some nice transitions here and there. Now, once I remove the excess charcoal powder, I can just push that charcoal dust into the paper and spread it around. And another thing I need to do is clean up the edges, because it's important for me to have a nice clean transition between my main subject and the background, so that the main subject would stand out in contrast against the background. And because the background is mostly dark, the lighter parts of my main subjects, those which are facing towards the light source, which are catching light from above, those will stand in contrast against the background. So we're going to have some lighter, shiny areas standing against the darker areas of the background. And there will be a lot of those shiny, reflective surfaces on the predator, because he's wearing some kind of an armor, some kind of a helmet, and some weapons and other gear. I don't really know what all those are. I'm just going to work off the reference photo and do the best I can. The size of the paper is 9 × 12 inches. The paper is 190 GSM. It's a smooth drawing paper. The charcoal pencils are Warrison woodless charcoal pencils. The pencil eraser that I'm using right now is a Kohinoor eraser and a pencil, and I use it to draw some smaller highlights, like for example around these cracks and dips and dints in the helmet. I want to make the helmet look like it's already sustained a bit of damage, like it's battle worn, and like this predator has already had some experience catching aliens or other prey. So as I was trying to pick a good reference for my drawing of predator, I wasn't initially sure whether I should pick one with a helmet on or without a helmet, because they are equally fascinating even without the helmet. But I chose this one, and I picked one of the references from one of the I think it was either a plastic figurine or a CGI 3D model that somebody made. I'm not really sure. I can't tell which one it was. but that's what I mainly worked off of. Of course, there are always some smaller changes and some artistic license, as with everything. Didn't want to do a real close-up and focus only on the helmet. I wanted to show a little bit more of his body and the gear. And right now I'm cleaning up the upper edge around this crest that he has on his helmet, because that's kind of what it looks like. Or a crown, I don't know what it is. But I don't really need to understand what all of these details are supposed to mean. All I have to do is try to understand the shape. And if I understand the shape, and if I understand where the light is coming from, it'll be easier for me to shade and to describe that shape to the viewer. Now in the around the eye area, I left some highlights, even though that part is in the shadow. And as for the background, the relationship between the background and the main subject, I'm always going to first cover the larger areas of background like I'm doing now, and do that mostly with brushes. And then I'm going to move in and work on the smaller areas with smaller brushes. And then I'll refine the edges using tortillons and the force erasers. Now, the helmet itself has quite a few of those, how should I put it, highlights, those shiny reflective areas. And I need to create these transitions between areas of very dark value and those shiny lighter areas, the highlights. This is often what you need to do when you're drawing things made out of metal. You need these transitions between areas of high contrast and these darker areas and lighter areas. So the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to use vine charcoal because it's easily moved around, and cover some of it while I'm going to leave some of the white spaces. And I'm not going to push the charcoal into those white spaces, I'm just going to push slightly towards them. And that way I'm going to create some highlights in the process. Now if I need to kind of reinforce that contrast a little bit, I can add a bit of charcoal pencil to the darker areas, and I can do a little bit of cleaning up of the highlights with a pencil eraser, and that way I will increase that range of value, and I will make these surfaces appear as though they are made out of some kind of metal, as you can see. And I'm just adding some highlights using my pencil eraser, and I'm also adding some smaller details around these dints and cracks on the helmet, because like I said, I want to make it look like it's been used in battle already, or in a hunt, if you will. So normally we have these highlights around these edges where the parts of the helmet are protruding, and because they are protruding, they are catching more light from the light source. Now I'm going to move on to this neck area, but notice that the lower part of the helmet, under the chin if you will, is a little bit lighter. It's not completely in the shadow. That's because of the reflected light from below. So now I'm adding some of these, I don't really know how to refer to them. They kind of look like braids. I guess it's predator's hair. So I don't know whether to call them hairs or tentacles. I don't know what they are, but they look kind of scary, and they have some kind of jewelry on them. They have some kind of rings or something, or bands. I don't know what metal bands, what those are. But this seems very, very complex. It almost feels like I'm trying to draw that character from the Pirates of the Caribbean, Davy Jones, because he had a lot of those tentacles overlapping, but here it's going to be kind of similar, except these are a little bit darker and there's going to be a bit more contrast. So I'm going to get back to those later, but right now I'm just going to do a little bit of work on this gun that he's carrying on his shoulder. Those are the special weapons that the Predators were carrying in the movie Alien vs. Predator. I guess they were made specifically for killing or for fighting aliens. So I'm just going to add the detail that I see, and obviously when you're drawing complex things like these, like weapons and technology, you can choose to draw every single detail, or you can kind of approximate and try to create an illusion of detail. And I'm going to try to do something in between. But what I'm mostly going to try to do is I'm going to try to stay consistent with my light source, which is coming from above, and to create that contrast between the upper side of that gun and the lower side of the gun, which is facing downwards and away from the light source. And I'm going to do the shading with a combination of my pencil and my blending tools, obviously. First suggesting some of the darker areas, and then making some smoother transitions, and later maybe going back in and adding some texture or details, or maybe adding some highlights by cleaning up some of the areas using my erasers. So this lower part needs to be a lot darker because it's facing away from the light source. And now the gun is starting to take shape. The gun is mounted on some sort of I don't know what it is. It's mounted on something which is resting on the Predator's shoulder, and it appears to have some joints or rotation points. So I put those in as well, so that it looks like a thing that's attached there, but it's still capable of being adjusted and moved around when he's aiming. But I cleaned up the upper side of the upper edge using a pencil eraser, and now I'm just adding some random texture by dragging my charcoal pencil to make the surface of that appear a little more, a little more rough and a little more interesting. I'm mostly, as for the charcoal pencils, I'm mostly using a combination of a soft charcoal pencil and a medium charcoal pencil. Generally, I do most of the work with a medium charcoal pencil, but if you use the soft charcoal pencil sparingly, and if you add those touches of really dark value using a soft charcoal pencil, that can really increase the range of value, and that can really add some additional depth to your drawing, and it'll really make it pop out to the paper. So right now I'm working on that hair, or the braids or tentacles, whatever they are, and first I'm going to define them by drawing around them, drawing their edges using a medium charcoal pencil, and I'm going to draw a little bit of dark value in between them, and later I'm going to use a brush to push that charcoal from those edges to the areas of lighter value in between. So what you need to understand about these shapes is that they are round, and whenever you're shading around object, the parts which are facing towards the light source, which are closer to the light source, are going to be a bit lighter, and the ones that are facing away from the light source, which are here deeper inside the shadow, they will be a bit darker. So when I covered this with a brush, you can see that I created some contrast, but at the same time I made the transitions between these darker areas in between the tentacles and the lighter areas. Now I'm going to clean up the lighter areas, as you can see, by using my pencil eraser and going over the middle part of each and every one of these, and that way this will make them stand out and it will make them look more three-dimensional. And I did the same thing with those metal bands or those rings as well, so that they too look not only more three-dimensional, but they also look more reflective, like they're actually made out of metal. Now moving on to some details on the predator's chest, and they usually wear some kind of trophies from the animals they hunted. So we're going to have some bones and some skulls here, and maybe some kind of a brooch. I don't know what that is, but I put that in as well. And I'm going to try to make that a lot lighter because it's of pale ivory color in the reference, and I need to make it almost completely white, but I can't make it completely white because some parts of it are in the shadow, so I need to shade the shadow side of it. Naturally, I do a little bit of background to create contrast with the lighter side of those bones and skulls. And now I'm moving on to drawing some of the other details, like for example his armor on the right, as well as some of his body and musculature, like his abs and things like that. One of the things that I find very useful, especially when I have a detailed and a little bit daunting subject like this one, what usually makes things easier for me is when if I have a sketch already and then I go over the sketch with some areas of darker value, establishing those areas of darker value. So it's kind of like a darker, more detailed sketch, which allows me to proceed from there and to put some transitional tones or mid-tones in between, and that really speeds up the process for me. I don't really know if I'm making sense, but I think that this is what works for me. So it kind of allows me to navigate around this complex subject a little bit more easily. Now notice that on the parts of the alien's body which are not covered by either the trophies or the gear, you can see some of his skin, and he has some kind of spots or freckles on his skin, and I'm going to put those in as well. Now they are kind of distributed in a similar manner as hair on a human body, but not quite, because here around the abs and around the middle portion of the chest and the ab area, we're going to have some of those dark spots, but I'm going to have those as well on the sides of the body. Now you can see how nicely those bones and skulls stand out against the shadow areas now, which is what I wanted. And I also need to shade the ab area to create a sufficient range of value so that the round parts of those muscles would stand out. And I'm also adding some of those darker spots using a soft charcoal pencil, because some of these are really, really dark. And I have to vary them in terms of size and shape a little bit. And this is a process that requires a little bit of patience if I want it to look good. So you can see that as you move towards the lighter areas, these spots get smaller and smaller, and in some other areas they're kind of grouped together and they're larger and larger. So I'm going to draw some more here on the sides of the body, and hopefully it's starting to look like actual skin. Almost looks like the skin of some kind of a toad or some kind of a lizard, I guess. Which may be what the creators of this character were going for. I don't really know what they were thinking, but obviously a lot of imagination was needed to create a character such as the Predator. Obviously, I think that the first movie in the franchise with Arnold Schwarzenegger was the best, in my opinion, but I do think that some of the other ones were not bad either. I did like the second part, and as for the Alien vs Predator, I guess the first movie was not that bad. It had some of its good moments. I also like some movies of the Alien franchise, but mostly the first 2 or 3, I guess. Mostly the first 2, I guess. I'm still working on these tentacles, adding a little bit more shadow in between, now adding a bit of that soft charcoal pencil. Now here on the right side of the chest area, or his left side, he has some kind of a bodily armor, and the shape, the lower part of it kind of looks like ribs. So I guess when they designed the armor for the Predator, they wanted it to look like some sort of an external skeleton, so that it's difficult to tell whether where the machine ends and where the body begins, I guess. And now I'm shading around these rib-like shapes and adding a bit more shadow under them. But you can see that here I also added some indications of damage, like some cracks and scratches and things like that. And I'm just shading it in a similar manner as I did other metallic surfaces, creating those strong highlights that kind of look like they're reflecting a bit of light. So I wanted to do this drawing of a Predator for quite some time, and I think I'm going to do one without the helmet, where I can draw the face as well. And I hope that you'll like this one, because I think there were even some people in the comments who requested drawing of the Predator, so here it is, I guess, for those of you who wanted to see it. And I hope the others will like it as well, because it's even if you don't like these movies, it's a very, very interesting, complex subject with a lot of these nice contrasts and transitions. So there are a lot of interesting things for an artist, even if you're not interested in science fiction and in this particular franchise. So I'm working a little bit more on the background, and now I'm gonna try to add some more details to this base area of the gun, the part where the gun is resting. So again, I can't really make out all the details, nor can I understand what all of the parts are for, but I'm going to simplify and approximate a little bit, and as long as I get the shadows and the textures right, I think the shapes, if I make some mistakes, they won't be a big problem. I mean, most people don't even know what the gear of a Predator looks like, and it's varied from one model to another in various movies, so it doesn't really matter. I think the original Predator in the first movie was portrayed by a really, really tall guy, much bigger than Arnold. That was a great adventure movie with some elements of horror and science fiction, of course. So here, as you can see, around this complex area, we have some sort of screws and some sort of gears and things like that. I just use my usual approach. I put down the darkest areas first so that I can understand the shape more easily, and then I just fill in the rest of the details, do the midtones and things like that. It's just a little bit easier for me to work that way. And of course, I can always go back and use this Kohinoor pencil eraser to try to clean up some of the highlights, but it's not always easy because sometimes my pencil gets dull, sometimes the charcoal gets buried into the paper a little bit too deep because of my blending tools, and it can be a little bit difficult to erase, especially if you want to create a clean white line. So there will be some limitations, but overall I find that erasing somehow has always worked a little bit better for me with charcoal than with graphite. With graphite it's easier with lighter values, but it's very dark with darker values, because the more graphite you put down, the greasier it gets, because graphite is a lubricant and it gets very difficult to erase. But with charcoal it's actually a little bit easier because the surface remains rough and it's easier for the rubber to grip against that surface and to remove some of that charcoal. I'm using the same approach as I did with the helmet. I'm putting down some of these darker areas on the metal parts of this shoulder armor, and I'm leaving some lighter areas in between, and then I use a brush or some other blending tool and I push the charcoal from those darker areas to the lighter areas, creating some highlights in between and creating some smoother transitions. So this allows me to control how I can render the shape of objects, but at the same time it allows me to control the texture as well. And during the blending process I often use several different types of brushes, and people often ask me about the brands of the brushes. I can't really tell you which they are just some local brands. You can use any brushes you can find, but I think that different types of brushes kind of have different effects on the blending process. So harder bristle brushes will tend to leave a little more texture, but at the same time they will push the charcoal a little bit deeper into the paper. The softer ones just move the charcoal across the surface of the paper, and they work really well with vine charcoal. So I did most of this shoulder armor with vine charcoal, and later when I wanted to add some of these darker areas with charcoal pencils, I used a harder brush to push those in, to push that darker charcoal in deeper into the paper. But both of them can be used to create some smoother transitions, except that these harder brushes, they tend to leave a little bit more of the texture in my experience. These are just some of the things that you'll have to adapt to whichever brush you're using. You just have to get to know your tools. Of course I can always go back and add a bit more texture, because I want the metal to look a little more rough, and I don't want the surface of the metal to look too smooth or too shiny. It does look a little bit reflective, but I can make it just a little bit more interesting. I'm finishing the background here, adding some darker tones as well, and now I'm going to do some of the finishing touches on this elbow and forearm area. He has some sort of protective gear around the arm as well, It looks like some of it is made out of leather, other parts appear like they're made out of some kind of metal. And there are some more of these spots here on this area where the skin is bare and where his skin is visible. So I shaded that to the best of my ability, and now I'm going to draw some of these final details on this band around the forearm, which also has some sort of I don't know, some sort of gear, some sort of weapons, maybe some sort of electronic equipment, who knows what it is. But I'm putting down some finishing touches here and doing a bit of final shading on both the background and the main subject. I need to refine the appearance of this forearm area a little bit. But the drawing here is done. I'm going to put a small signature in the lower right corner. It's barely visible and I want it that way. And now the drawing is finished. I hope you like it. Don't forget to check out my other videos. If you want to see longer videos, check out my Patreon. And thank you for watching once again. I'm going to see you in the next one. Bye for now.